Shalom and welcome to another edition of Our Daily Bread. I'm Messianic Torah, and this week's parashat is the first parashat of the book of Shemot, also called Exodus, and it's called Shemot, which means names. This parashat starts in Exodus, or Shemot 1:1, Aleph Aleph, through 6:1, with the Haftorah in Yirmiyahu, or Jeremiah, 1:1 through 2:3. And my message for 2025 is called The Resistance. Now, in this week's parashah, it starts off with, the names of all the children of Israel, which came into Mitzrayim, and then it goes right into the fact that there arose a new king. And, Joseph died, all of his brethren, the new king feared Yisra'el, and so he put burdens on them. So we start off with this idea of fear, and we just got out of this last parashah where it was kind of, Mitzrayim was part of the story with Joseph, but it was really centered around the conflict with his brothers. And now we're going to switch gears, and now we're going to see Yisrael as a whole having a conflict with Mitzrayim, in particular Paro, but obviously all of Mitzrayim. And so my message is called The Resistance. And the first bullet point is called The Race of Growth. Now, what you see is this kind of fighting. And this fear that the new king has is that, Israel is growing so much that what if they turn against us? Now, of course, that doesn't make any sense, because if they're growing so much that they would be a threat to you, then obviously putting them in bondage, maybe they weren't quite big enough to take on Paro and Mitzrayim or Egypt, but at the point that you're afraid of somebody, then probably, instigating and trying to cause harm to them, I would say would be probably a dumb idea. That's like saying, oh, look at that dog, it's so dangerous looking, maybe I'll go throw a rock at it, and that's what Mitzrayim's going to do. Now, obviously, they had leverage because the children of Israel are going to be in slavery for 400 years, and that's a long time. And I think this brings up one of the first points that's important to understand is that if Israel was growing enough to the point that Mitzrayim feared that they were too powerful, then Israel should also be self-aware. They should be self-aware enough to understand, just like, the Holocaust. At the point that they're wanting to load people into trains and, hey, don't worry, you're not going to need your glasses or you're not going to need your shoes, that would have been the time to revolt. Don't wait until they get you into the concentration camps and weaken you and starve you and get you in an upper hand on you. A lot of times it gets so bad that, and this goes historically, that when things get so bad, then people rise up. There's a resistance, there's a revolt, and ultimately a revolution. And that's where it's gone so bad that people have had enough. But the problem is that if you wait until you're at your weakest point and your enemy's at its strongest before you decide enough is enough, many times historically, history has been changed. Countries and rulers have been overthrown historically. At this point, number one, they get so greedy, they get so oppressive, right? That's what Mitzrayim means, oppression. Once things get so oppressive that it's ridiculous, that the only choice left when they've taken everything from you is to rise up and make your whole life about fighting back. Now, from a strategic standpoint, this is a very stupid point to go when you're a ruler. By the time that a ruler is not only having this great position of power, that they abuse it so much to where they feel we're just going to keep abusing these people. We're going to abuse our power to the point that it's so flagrant that the people have nothing else that they can do but put their whole life and their whole heart, into fighting back. This is a strategically stupid position for the people who are in power. It's like the old saying, you can shear a sheep for life, but you can only skin them once. If you get to the point where you're so greedy or that you're so opulent and foolish to think and just basking in your own power that you think you're unstoppable. We've seen this. You see this in sports. As the scriptures say, pride comes before the fall. So usually that period of pride is that period when people think that they can do whatever they want. They can oppress to the highest degree no matter how far they want to oppress. Maybe they have an upper hand. Maybe they think that they're now unstoppable. It's like we've seen throughout history. Look in the Dark Ages, the people living in the castles were so wealthy, and that they were living, with all of these pastries and treats and these extravagant feasts where the tables were 20 feet long, 30 feet long, and they had so much food, and the people that they ruled over had literally nothing. They were eating grass. They were having soup with nothing in it. They oppressed the people so far and allowed themselves to get so high up that eventually the peasants one day said, you know what? We're going to die. Why should we die here literally eating dirt while this handful of people who are ruling over the land, who are being oppressive, who are taxing us, taking the little that we do have, are up there having great feasts? And one day they just kick the door in and kill all those people and decide, you know what? A, you're not going to tax us, but B, I think we're going to eat at your feast. And, this has happened many times throughout history because the people in power, the people on top, they get so comfortable, they get so elevated, so ivory tower, so out of touch with the people that they're oppressing, and then they increase the oppression while they're living opulent lives. And at a certain point, when you take everything from somebody, the smartest thing that person could do when they have nothing left is take what you have, is to turn the tables, right? That's where the resistance turns into a revolution. And, that's happened so many times in history because, and the funny thing is that the revolution always is the fault of the oppressive people who were in power. Because had they just not been quite that oppressive, they could have gone on and on if they didn't take everything from the people. But when they get greedy and they're trying to take that last little kibble, that last little ounce, that's when they go too far. And usually that happens again. Pride comes before the fall because they think they're untouchable. Right? The power of the people is always greater than the power of the rulers. We've seen that. We see this with Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim was probably one of the strongest countries, and they had the military and all that, but they didn't have the numbers. There's more people, common people, peasants. And just like a swarm, just like in the plagues, right, that we're going to get to eventually in these books. The plagues, the flies, little tiny things, fly, ant, frogs, if there's enough of them, locusts, they win because there's just sheer numbers. So no matter how powerful, it's just like in the Holocaust. You might have armed soldiers there with machine guns and just everyday Israelites, just sitting there and they're not armed or anything like that. And they're like, well, we got to get in this train car because, every 10 feet there's someone with a machine gun. But it's like, but they can only shoot bullets so fast. There's a swarm of you. And at the end of the day, if you get in that train car and you go to where they're trying to take you, this may be you still have your strength about you. You still had something for lunch. If you're going to wait until they've starved you for 4 or 5 months as they torture and kill you, like that's not the time to revolt. That's not the time to create the resistance. The smartest time is to say, you know what? This is already looking bad. Let's not let them put us in a weaker position. Let's go from a position of strength. We have our best shot, right? You have to understand the timeline and how that's going to end up for you right up front when you have the strength. And it's funny because there's a show, I don't know what channel it's on, but it's called Alone. And the people, it's a reality show, and they strand the people on, some place that's very harsh, and they give them nothing but a few items, and they have no shelter, no food, and they get dropped off in the middle of nowhere in a harsh environment. And then it's whoever can last the longest ends up winning, I don't know, maybe it's $1 million or something like this. What's interesting when you watch that show, there's a pattern that goes on. The people who, when they land, they usually lose a lot of weight over the 30 days or however long they're out there. They end up being skin and bones. The people who start off skinny, they're always, no matter how skilled they are, they always have to tap out first because they don't have enough. Once their body starts eating itself, they don't have enough meat on the bone, and they end up being too weak. The other thing that you see is the people who don't build a shelter real early, while they have the energy, they kind of meander along and they kind of scope the territory out, and they might do a little bit of hunting and stuff, but they fail to build their shelter. Guess what? In that show, every time anybody who decides a week later, week in to build their shelter, 2 weeks in, the problem is they run out of energy. And now when they haven't eaten for 2 weeks and now they want to start building a shelter, they're using up all their calories and their energy trying to build this shelter when they're weak. They needed to do it on day one when they were still strongest. And if they don't, they're not going to survive. And then a lot of those people, they have a half-built shelter, then the storms come in, and they never catch back up. And that's what you see with this idea. Whenever there's a challenge to you, or your sovereignty, or whatever it is, we have the children of Israel, right? The best time to resist is early. And never let them have an inch. Never let people have an inch on you. When you do that, you're moving from a position of strength into a position of weakness. So everything's a big deal, right? Israel at the time when they first tried to put them in bondage could have revolted. And that's probably when they were their strongest, right? Not after they were, beaten and whipped and starved and all of this, and we're going to get the bricks without straw and all this. Israel, when that person tried to put them into bondage, that's probably when they could have made their strongest fight. And probably when they should have. They should have figured out real quick that Paro, was not their friend. And that this wasn't going to get better. If it says he ruled over them with rigor. He put them under hard bondage. Now, do you think in another 100 years that's going to get easier or harder? Like, people get used to it. Oh, they're a little oppressed, then they're a little more oppressed. If you look historically, oppression is progressive and cumulative. It's not going to get better. And those people who want to oppress you, do not allow them an inch. Do not allow them to take a little bit of oppression. It's going to get worse over time. Do not allow them to strengthen themselves and weaken you. That is what's happening here. They're saying, hey, they're too strong. Let's put them in bondage. Now, they were living freely, pursuing whatever things that they wanted to pursue. And now they're put in bondage and they're having to serve Paro. And they're building his cities instead of building their own wealth. Right? And this brings me to a really interesting, there was a movie series a while back, I don't know, a documentary. It was called Guns, Germs, and Steel. It was a study of societies. And it came from a book, a bigger book, but I think it was the History Channel or somebody turned it into, it was either the History Channel or National Geographic or something, that turned it into a little like 4-part series. You can find it on YouTube. But what it was is this guy set out and wanted to understand, how is it possible? It was about human society. How is it there's still some people that are living in the jungle, you know, in tribes, remote tribes who have no technology and this and that. And then you have people developing, say, advanced AI and, you know, nanotechnology and all this stuff. How is it that over the last 100 years or 1,000 years that some people developed and some people didn't? And that was the premise of the research. So the guy spent, I think, like 15 years or something researching, trying to figure out what made some civilizations and cultures advance faster than others. And the output ended up kind of being summarized in this book. Now, or this show. What I found really interesting about that, and what I would boil it down to, is it's very much like this parashah, and it's actually my third point. I'm jumping ahead a little bit. But it's this idea of free time. The people who were collecting bananas, and that's what they ate, they couldn't accumulate anything, you know? And the people who were in certain latitudes where they had different crops like wheat, that you could get a whole year's worth of food and store up. Well, then if you're freed up and you have a bunch of food, then you're not always going out every couple days trying to get food. And if you're going out every couple days to get food, you're not sitting back with free time to advance yourself. And if you look at the people who maybe have a year or 2 years, they got a good harvest, they got 6 months. Maybe they go, you know what? Let's develop some tools to farm a little bit better. And then one thing leads to another, and then they're farming better, and they're storing up their food. They're getting their job done faster. And then they get some more free time, and they reinvest that free time. And now they're going, well, let's advance this. Let's advance, the way we get water. We're walking 2 miles to water. What if we build a little, pathway or a little system, or we use animals to carry the water for us so we're not tired and we have more energy to do other things. And those little advances, those little advantages add up and get you further and further. And when people don't have those advantages, they stay behind. They're on a treadmill. They're going nowhere. And so that is very much what Paro, later on towards the end of this parashah, digs into. He says, let them make bricks without straw. Because they're idle. In other words, they have free time. Therefore, they're going to worship. They're advancing themselves. Now, anybody who's ever played a real-time strategy game, there's many of them, but some of the classics are like Age of Empires. Okay? It's just a little game, and there's a lot of games like that, but where you go and you start with one villager, and then you plant some fields, and then when you get enough food and you chop down some wood, you can build buildings, and you're basically sending your little people to go do tasks. And then when you have enough wood, you build buildings, and then you can build homes. And if you have enough homes and enough food, you have resources that are accumulating, and then you spend those resources to create another villager. Now you have another worker. And then you can eventually get to a certain point where you create a little military, like a guard that guards you in case wild animals come and attack your citizens and stuff. And, you keep advancing. And once you have enough things advance, you advance to the next age, as they call it. And all your buildings get an upgrade, and it's basically a civilization starting, and they have some out there. I think there was one called Empire Earth, where you started as a caveman, and it's kind of funny. And then you advance through all the ages until you're in futuristic space ages. And it goes along this same idea. This growth, this race for growth, this advancement. Okay, everybody's doing that individually, and then people do it cumulatively as a nation. And so when you apply that to Israel and Mitzrayim, you can see that Israel was being blessed by God, and they were advancing. And the first thing we get is he tells the Hebrew midwives to kill the male babies. He doesn't want them to keep growing. They're growing, just like that game, because you have two civilizations, you have two or three, and whoever advances faster, well, then they're developing troops faster, and eventually there's wars, and they fight, and one takes over the other. And so the whole point of that game is who can advance faster. And so we have a little bit of this real-time strategy game here with Israel and with Paro, where Paro's worried. And so he wants to eliminate, and that's what happens in the game. If someone's soldiers comes and kills some of your citizens, you have to spend resources to recreate those, and it's the time to recreate those, and it gives you a setback. And while you're doing that, they're building more. If they didn't get a setback and you did, then they're building troops while you're building citizens so that you can get the resources to build the troops. Once you get behind, one person has an advantage over the other, and that's the goal, is to win the game. So we see that it's very similar to this. And this is how human history is as well. All these things are overlapping. They're all telling the same story. So we have this idea where Paro wants to stop the birth rate of Israel because of my second point. So it's all a race for growth, and that's where he's afraid. They're growing faster than I am. And that gets us to our second point of my message, is jealousy. So it's a race. And now we get into jealousy. And what's interesting about this is compare Bereshit, right? And in particular, the last two or three parashas, where we have Yosef. Yosef has jealous brothers. So now it's an internal thing in Israel where there's jealousy. So if you go all the way back to Cain and Havel, you have Cain's offering, right? He was jealous because Havel, Abel, his brother, his offering was accepted and his was not. And so he got jealous. So the first murder happened with Cain. And now you have this jealousy. So jealousy is a very powerful and destructive force throughout human history and throughout biblical history. So it happened within the family, right? There's jealousy. You have internally with man and woman, right? It says that her desire with Adam and Hava was to her husband, which is to rule over her husband, but it says, but he shall rule over you. So you had jealousy among the genders. You had jealousy among brethren, right? With Cain and Havel. You have jealousy even with the serpent, right? With the adversary to God and God, there's a jealousy over his creation. They're fighting over who the creation will listen to the serpent, listen to God. Jealousy is a crazy and powerful and destructive force. You had Yosef with the jealousy among his brethren, and now you have jealousy among nations, among Paro and the Mitzrayim, the Egyptians, and Israel. Now, here, because of this jealousy and the race for growth, right, and advancement, you have Paro trying to kill, population control, essentially this is just, kind of ancient, what he attempted to do was ancient form of abortion, because he tells the Hebrew midwives to kill the males at birth, so we have late term, if not, post-birth abortion attempted here. That's the kind of person Paro was. You also have him with this jealousy, right? Trying to stop them economically. He wanted to destroy their time. So he wanted a destruction of their time. So there's an attack on their time. There was an attack, obviously, on their sovereignty and their freedom as a group of people living among Mitzrayim. So he wanted to enslave them and force them to work for him, not for themselves. So in that sense, almost like entrepreneurship versus like being an employee, right? Because in one case, they were building their own life and their own value and benefit. And then he forced them to stop doing that and come to work for him. So we also then have him trying to control the provision, their ability to provide for themselves versus their ability or their effort to provide for him to build his cities. You have a situation where he then makes their work harder so that, again, they have less free time. And that goes to this third point, which is this bricks without straw, right? It's trying to advance himself and his kingdom while pushing down, keeping others from advancing themselves, converting them to be working for him so that you get a double whammy where not only are they not advancing their own lives and their own prosperity, but that they're spending their time to advance his prosperity so he's getting more prosperous while pushing them down and they're getting less prosperous simultaneously. Trying to destroy their birth rate, trying to destroy their finances, trying to waste their time. All of these things are not just stories that we're reading about. All of these things are still actively being done to people in the modern times. They're being done to you, to me, to nations, to the children who love God, right? Work. People want you to work, 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 work. You meet somebody, you say, what do you do for a living? People do that to get to know what a person is because 2/3 of their day are usually spent on their work, but most people are working for other people. They're making someone else wealthy. They're so busy trying to keep their lights on and pay their bills, they're out there working for pennies on the dollar while the owners of the company they work for are getting wealthy. That's bricks without straw. It's a modern version of it. You got people out there that if they're so busy and they're not making enough money, the more financial struggle, they say, well, we can't afford to have kids. They don't want you to have kids. They don't want you to have a big family. Same thing. They create jealousy among the households so that the husband and wife are fighting, that the two genders are, instead of working cohesively in an organized manner that God established as the man as the head, right? And the woman as the helper. Instead, they got everybody out there, the family split up, the wife's working, the husband's working, the children are shipped off to a public school. The family is broken apart. And as a result, everybody's so busy and so separated that it's bricks without straw. And so you don't have strong families. You don't have abundance. You don't have abundant, strong, big families. That's how Israel was originally. Okay? And then piece by piece, as we see in this week's parashah, they were dismantled. They were dismantled piece by piece to try and be weakened, right? So to be strong versus to be weak, right? To be strong is working for yourself, building your future. To be weak is working for someone else's future. To be strong is to have a big family. To be weak is to have a small family. To be strong is to be able to provide for yourself. To be weak is to not be able to provide for yourself. To be strong is to have free time and control of your time. And to be weak is not to have control of your time and not have any free time. So if you just build out a little chart there and analyze your life and your family, you can measure yourself up to see, according to this week's parashah, how do you line up? How strong or weak are you? And how much, because a lot of modern society puts a lot of these same things in place on the children of God. And the question is, they don't want you to grow. They want you being jealous and fighting amongst yourselves. And they want you to have no free time because you're so busy chasing the dollar. Okay? You got to figure out how to make money. So it's not ruling over you, right? So you're not dependent on it. You have to figure out how to be successful, how to get ahead as a nation, as the children of God. And that's part of the resistance to have your freedom. Because if you want your freedom to be taken away, well, then be few in number, right? Be infighting, so you're too busy fighting each other, not following God's principles and established structures, and be broke and have no free time to study the Word of God. All the time I ask people I run into, I haven't seen for a while, how's your Torah study? It's usually what I say. I mean, what else matters? Only a few things. The answer is usually a little bit of squirmy. Oh, it's okay. It's like, oh, maybe you should focus more on that. Maybe you're busy. Oh, I'm busy at work. Oh, yeah, I've been done. I don't want to hear about it work. The work doesn't matter. That's bricks without straw. Okay? You got to figure it out. You got to be smart. You got to work twice as fast, twice as hard, because continually the world wants to make everything take longer, then be a master at making things go faster. If finances are taking up all your time away from your family, then you better figure out how to have a side hustle or 2 or 3 side hustles, or get in the right career, or get out of the one that you're in and get in something that makes more money with more output for less input. Okay? Because a lot of people, a lot of Messianics I know, they're struggling. They're broke. Well, it's like, okay, well, what are you doing? If that work field that you decided to be involved in, you could pivot at any time and change. Find something that makes more money. Reach out, network with other Messianics or other people. Figure out there's smart people. There's people who've gotten ahead. Goes back to jealousy. Joseph was fighting with his brethren. Well, once Paro wants to start making you a slave, you better stop infighting, because now, why would you internally be each other's enemies when there's a greater enemy from the outside? The person who's not part of your family is a greater enemy. And if you're busy fighting each other, you might not notice the true enemy is from the outside, not the inside. You got to make sure that there's no enemies inside so that you can handle the enemies outside, because they don't care about you. They'll come and crush you. You can't be infighting. And so you got to have a strong internal. So the outside is just like the Messiah said, the inside of the cup's clean, then the outside will be clean, right? Clean the inside first. Okay, so it's the same way spiritually. But you got to do this in your life. And you got to figure out for your life how to build success. You say, oh, I don't care about success. But you got to. Because if you're part of the children of God, and those people are in a position of strength, then they'll be able to defend themselves against the people who are the enemies of God. Right? So you might not think that you care if you're doing okay financially or physically or spiritually or mentally or with your relationship or your family or whatever. But all those pillars, all those bricks, see these bricks? Bricks without straw. Israel became brick builders. But you got to become a brick builder. If you don't want to be a slave to Paro, to the oppressor, then you got to know how to build those bricks for yourself. Don't build his treasure cities. Build your treasure cities for you, for your children. And if you don't care about it and it's not about you, well, then do it for the other children of Israel, for the children of God, who might not have that capability. And you go, you know what? Well, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty smart. I can go over here and do this thing. But, there's 10 people over there who really, they can't operate at this same level. But maybe I could operate with them or for them at a higher level and take some of my excess and help them over there. That's what Joseph did. Joseph went and stored up the grain. He was superior to his brethren. Watch my last message. 12 tribes of Israel. Joseph is one. technically two, Ephraim and Manasseh. But Joseph was superior to his brethren, right? Everybody's not the same. Sorry. It's not warm and fuzzy. It's factual based. Joseph was a superior child out of the 12. Okay, his father favored him. And he saved not only his father, his brothers, who were ultimately murderers of their own brother. So they're not so great. Okay, they tried to kill him. Were willing to put their father through all kinds of grief. They even said to Joseph, it would kill my father if I went back without his son. But they didn't think about that when they were going to kill Joseph. They didn't care about killing their father then. Now all of a sudden they care about it. So Joseph was superior. The one out of the 12 saved all the other ones. Okay? When they sent the spies, it was no different. 2 out of 12. Caleb and Yahushua. Right? Out of the 12 spies. The other ones went off, had an evil report on the promised land. And he saved Caleb and Yahushua. He said, I'm going to save them and bring them in. The other one's going to die in the wilderness. Their children are going to go in. Okay? So even among Israel, it's not like everybody's equal. Everybody's the same. It isn't that way. Okay? So if you have the ability or you have greater abilities, there's other people who have lesser abilities. You think Moshe was the same as the children of Israel? No, he was superior. As a matter of fact, we're getting to Moshe right here. It says he was a goodly child, so she hid them. You can research. It's an interesting study. The theories on what that meant. But the point is he was going to be set apart. He was special. And the special people in Israel help all of Israel. Okay? So you got to figure out, well, what are you doing for yourself? And how are you helping the other people trying to follow the Torah? Okay? Perfect example. We do what's called corners of the field. Okay? It tells you that when you're an Israelite, right? It's in the Torah. It says you shall not glean, right? All the grapes of your field. You leave them from the poor, the widow, and the fatherless. So if you have a sheaf that you left out there, you don't go back and gather everything. You leave some. So how do we translate that today? You go, well, I'm not really growing wheat. I don't got a vineyard. Okay, when you get a paycheck, do you spend it all? Because that paycheck is your field. So corners. If you make $1,000, do you consume it all? Or do you take a little bit? Whatever that is. You figure that out, what your corners, your field look like. But do you take something? It's just, this is the practice that I do from it. How I interpret that is that you shouldn't consume everything that you're blessed with. God gives the increase, right? It says he makes rich, he makes poor. So if you get a check for $10, maybe you give $1, set it aside in what I call corners of the field. And then when somebody is in need, go look around. If you don't know who's in need, stack it up. There's plenty of Torah observant people. A lot of people struggling to pay their bills, struggling here and there. Man, we survived for years, off the kindness and generosity when we needed help, a decade ago. Off of the kindness of people who I've met online, other Messianics and people who helped us out when we were having financial struggles. Everybody can do that. Look at the widow's mite. She only had, a penny, basically. She gave everything she had. So no matter if you're rich or poor, you should not consume everything that you're blessed with. Set it aside. And then when someone says, oh, they need help, you're not empty-handed. Because God blessed you, Now he's blessing them through you. Because that's corners of the field, because you didn't consume everything you were blessed with. And you may be in need of blessing. But imagine if everybody, if all the Torah observant people and all the Messianics had a little aside and were helping each other with that. Do you realize how much better everybody would be doing? They would be hope, because the Christians have Christian charities. The Catholics have Catholic charities. The Jews have Jewish charities. The world has their charities. I'm sure the atheists, I'm sure everybody has their own charities. But I look out in the Messianics and I don't see, they're very disorganized. And so there's no sense of like, hey, and this is founded in the Torah. It doesn't say leave the corners of your field for somebody, send it to another nation. Those were for the poor, the widows, the fatherless among Israel. So Israel's supposed to have their charity among each other. So it's a great practice to start. If you have nobody to give it to, set it aside. Sometimes sometimes someone's going to come up and you're going to be able to bless them. Maybe you have $50 and somebody say, "Oh man, I'm having a tough time," and you send it over to them. It may not solve all their problem, but I tell you what, when you got big problems, every little, like the rich man and Lazarus says, if you could just put a drop of water on my tongue. When somebody's in a difficult situation, every piece helps, even if you can't solve their whole problem. Because sometimes that's just hope for them. Sometimes that's just something good when everything in their life is bad. Really makes a big difference. Right? So start doing that. My goal, I'd love to, build some kind of thing, some kind of charity. I don't know anything about that, but eventually my goal was to, make that an actual charity so that people could centralize, put it in. But, there's always corruption when you're dealing with money and things like that. You can't trust anybody. But down the road, I might put something together. So if people want to send it in and then know that that's all going out and it's all transparent and all the records are, publicly available so you can see, okay, cool, you help people. I mean, even people asking for help sometimes, they could be con artists, they could be trying to get stuff like that. But two things. Number one, you have to do your due diligence. But then on top of it, you can't be too high-minded either, because people are in need. You know what I mean? People are in need, and everyone can do this directly. They don't have to have some big thing they send it into. And then sometimes you have to be proactive. Sometimes you have to go online. Hey, does anybody need any prayers, any help? You can do it subtly. I do that all the time. Because if someone's praying and they lost their job, guess what? They probably might have some financial problems. So you might reach out to them privately and say, hey, I have a little something. I don't know if it'll help, but happy to send it over to you. And then if you're doing that, then they're less likely to be scammers because you reached out to them. They didn't reach out to you. See what I'm saying? Or you can just come out and ask people. There's no loss for need. I would say maybe be careful. There's known scams out there. People, there's Nigerian scams where it's like, hey, they all, anybody who's, I've sadly seen people, oh yeah, I'm supporting this person in Nigeria or whatever. And it's like, I'm sending them for their Bible camp and all that. And it's like, bro, there's scams. There's crime scams where they send the same message. I've talked to those people before. Oh, okay, really? Where are you? Oh, you're in kind of. Well, oh, you can't afford a Bible, but you're in an internet cafe. Like, you start asking some questions, the stories don't line up, and then you start getting the same story exactly verbatim from 5 different people, and it's like, oh, that's weird. It's like, okay, there's definitely ways to vet people, and you can also look through your own friends list and stuff. You don't need to send it to another country to help people. You probably have people that you've, people don't like to come out and say that they're struggling, but if you're engaging with people and finding out what's going on with their life, what are things that you could pray for, all this kind of stuff, you know, there's probably people that you know that you engage with all the time that are probably struggling financially. So it's easy to help. They don't have to be, you know, in some dire straight situation to help somebody out with corners of the field. So it's a little something for you to think about. But this goes back to bricks without straw. So as we sit here and we look at this, we see that you have Moshe in this special situation. He's a goodly child. You know, he's going to be raised as a Mitzrayim, which is so funny. Because if you're part of the group, they're not bothered by you. They're more bothered when you're not part of their group. So he ends up getting raised by the Mitzrayim, and sometimes that's what happens. Is, you know, again, comes from being in a position of strength. If he would have been out there, he wouldn't have had the power if he wasn't raised like a Mitzrayim. He wouldn't have the same things and abilities if he was raised as a slave versus raised as kind of, you know, an upper class citizen or royalty or whatever. And that's what I'm saying. You got to move your way up. You got to move your way up in the world, not just for your own sake, but for others that you're blessing, that you're helping. You know, pooling talent and doing that. You know, again, it goes back to this race of growth. You know, you're not by yourself. It's not just, oh, I'm failing, but I'm just failing by myself. And you can succeed together. You know, network, communicate. How can I support you? What do you do for business? Is that the best thing? Is there something I can help you with? Is there something you can help me with? Is there something we can do together? You know, you know, I would much rather bless somebody who is Messianic than just a random stranger in the world with my talents, abilities, time, and energy. You know, people are too individual, and they're not thinking as a whole, right? The children of God. So you got to look for it. You got to see where you can bless people. You got to see where you can advance yourself, develop yourself, so that you could be more of a blessing to other people in the community, and then go be a blessing in the community. So now we get to this last part where it's the last part where he kind of says, okay, now he's going to go send them and show them signs. And they believe right away until it comes down to Paro trying to punish them, because now they're setting themselves apart. And so there's two different kinds of struggle. There's the everyday struggle where they were just going along being slaves and happy with it. But then when it's like, oh, well, now if you're not letting them take advantage of you and building their future while you destroy and keep your own from being built, once you start deciding, oh, it's just like entrepreneurship. It's hard. It's difficult. Yeah. But again, less difficult if you network, less difficult if you have support, less difficult if you have help, if you're networking and working together and building things and doing things for your own blessing and for the blessing of the broader community of Messianics. You know? That's where, you know, you're going to eliminate trying to do it by yourself. You know, I've seen some Messianics out there that are doing good in business and all that. It's like, cool, we'll turn around. Why, you know, don't just bless the world, bless other people who are trying to keep the Torah of God. Because that's a high calling. It's just like the Leviim. Their inheritance was Yodeh Waheh. When there was the first fruits, the best of everything, those were given to the priests. That's their portion, the best of everything, because they were serving God. And so it's a high calling to obey the Torah, to try and live a godly life, a Torah life. And that should mean that the provision should be provided for. We can't just keep being separate. You know, just like these bricks in the walls. There's not a single brick. All the bricks come together. That's a wall. That is the defense. That is the resistance. That is what keeps the enemies outside. A singular brick not going to keep anybody out. But the bricks held together with the mortar and a commonality, working together in a network, that becomes a strong force. Sometimes an impenetrable force. There's great historic stories about great walls and great defenses, great battles and attempts to breach strong walls. And Israel has to be a strong wall. And they have to work together. They got to stop thinking individually. Okay? And then we get, of course, the Haftorah story of Yirmiyahu, the prophet. And realizing that, again, what do the prophets do? The prophets come back and point out these weak points in the wall, weak points in the mortar. All these bricks, all these children of Israel, the mortar, they should be held together with the mortar of righteousness, with the mortar of the Torah, thinking about others they're connected to, they're part of, doing their part. What happens when a prophet comes? They hate him. They want to kill him. Hey, I like being a brick all by myself. My life's pretty good. You just told me I got to be thinking and worrying about other bricks. Or, hey, you're saying that I'm, my mortar's weak. I'm not doing the right things. They want to, the prophets, they're like the I was going to say stonecutter, the mason, right? They come back and look at all the bricks and see how they're connecting and all this. What's weak? What's strong? The bricks, they always hate the mason. That's how it happens. When God sends his prophets to the people who they're helping, they don't like correction. Okay? You got to start liking correction. It says the wise man, when he's corrected, thanks the person. It's a blessing. Thank you, God, for sending your prophet. Now, he's coming back to tell you what you're doing is wicked and wrong, but you should be thanking him. Because had he not come back, you would have just been worthy of being destroyed. But now you can repent, and that's merciful. I see it all the time, and I see it still. People get angry when they're corrected. Even when you're fellowshipping with other Messianics, someone says something that you don't agree with or corrects something, and people, because it's their idea, they feel they have to defend it, even if it's wrong. Even after someone showed them was wrong, they're still defending it. When they could have logically said, I'm in the wrong here. Let me change and adapt. That's what they did to the Messiah. They wanted to kill him because he came, correctly interpreted the Torah, showed them where they were doing it wrong, where they misunderstood. They didn't like that. Right? That's a problem. So you got to get better at that. This wall, you're going to need to, there's going to come a point in time you're going to need a strong wall. You're going to need to be a brick in a strong wall. And you better be working on that. You better be figuring that out. You better be figuring out life, because bricks without straw will keep you distracted and weak and not unified, and you'll have no resistance to evil. Okay? So you got to work on that individually and holistically as a group. So I hope this lesson was a blessing to you and drove you to take new action. Until next time, I'm going to say shalom.